Friendship forever. On the way to school one day, Mr. Lee said to Mark, "Do you want to come and see Hamlet at the City Theater on Saturday afternoon? My father is going to take me," he said. "You can come too." Mark Clark and Mr. Lee McDonald were best friends. They loved going to the theater to see plays. They both wanted to be actors. They went to acting lessons in the city every Monday afternoon. Mr. Lee liked to dance too. He went to tap dancing classes every Saturday afternoon. He loved the sound his tap dancing shoes made. Mark didn't learn tap dancing. He played football for the school every Saturday. "Hamlet is a play by William Shakespeare," said Mr. Lee. "I know that," said Mark. "I want to play Hamlet one day." He jumped in front of Mr. Lee and said in a loud voice, "To be or not to be, that is the question." "Very good, Mark. Do you want to come?" "Yes, I'd love to see it, thanks." "Who's playing Hamlet?" "Heath Mason," said Mr. Lee. "Wow," said Mark. Heath Mason was an actor in a television show called Here and Now. He played a young doctor, Dr. Kim. The boys watched the show every Monday night. "I really want to see Hamlet," said Mr. Lee, "so I won't go to tap dancing class this Saturday. My dancing teacher will understand. She loves Heath Mason too." Mark stopped walking. "Oh, no." "What?" asked Mr. Lee. "I can't come to the play. I have to play football on Saturday," said Mark. "We have an afternoon game against Riverdale High. Mr. Rankin won't understand." "Ask him, Mark. You have to come," said Mr. Lee. "I'll ask him at training after school today," said Mark. "But he won't be happy." After football training that afternoon, Mark said to his coach, "Can I speak to you, please, Mr. Rankin?" "What is it, Mark?" Mr. Rankin, the football coach, was a short man with a red face. He always yelled at the players. "It's about the game on Saturday," said Mark. "What about it?" said Mr. Rankin. "I don't want to play in it, sir," said Mark. "What?" "Why not?" yelled Mr. Rankin. "You are the best player I have." I want to go to the theater. Heath Mason is in Hamlet." "The theater? We're playing Riverdale on Saturday." Mr. Rankin was angry. "No, Mark, we need you. Forget about going to the theater." Mr. Rankin walked away. Gary Howard walked over to Mark and said, "Listen, Clark, you're not the best player. I am. But you be at that game on Saturday or I'll come and get you." Gary Howard was the biggest boy on the football team. He was strong. He had very large hands. He put a hand in front of Mark's face. "Hello, Mark." "Hello, Gary," a voice said. It was Mr. Lee. He stood next to Mark. Gary put his hand down and said, "Be there on Saturday, Clark, or I'll find you." He walked away. "What was that about?" asked Mr. Lee. "Mr. Rankin said I was the best player. Gary heard him." "Oh," said Mr. Lee. Gary did look angry. "Can you come and see Hamlet?" "No," said Mark. "I'm in the team. I have to play football on Saturday." Mr. Lee, at lunchtime the next day, Mr. Lee came running to Mark. "Mark, he's here, at our school. Hamlet's here." "Who's here?" asked Mark. "Heath Mason. I saw him talking to the teachers." "Heath Mason here? Where is he?" The boys hurried through the school. "There he is!" yelled Mr. Lee at the school hall. "He's going into the school hall!" Mark and Mr. Lee ran into the hall. The boys looked for the actor, but they couldn't see him. It's empty, said Mark. Did you really see him? I did, said Mr. Lee. It was him. They went up onto the stage. Hey, Mr. Lee, you be Hamlet, and I'll be the king, said Mark. Come, Hamlet, come and take this hand from me. Just then, Heath Mason walked onto the stage. Hello, he said. That's very good. The boys looked at him. I'm Heath. I know, said Mark. You're Heath Mason. Heath Mason smiled and walked across to the boys. Who are you? He asked. I'm Mark, and this is Mr. Lee. But what are you doing here? I'm an old boy of this school, said Heath. You are? Said Mark. Yes, I was a student here. I left 12 years ago. I acted in my first play here, on this stage. Mr. Lee and I love acting, said Mark, but the school doesn't put on plays now. That's sad, said Heath. My English teacher, Miss Piper, put on the school plays then. Does she teach here now? He asked. No, said Mark. Mr. Lee and I go to an acting school in the city, said Mark. We put on plays there. I'm coming to see you in Hamlet on Saturday, said Mr. Lee. Good. Are you coming too, Mark? Asked Heath. I want to, but I can't. I have to play football. Mr. Rankin was my football coach, said Heath. Does he teach here now? Yes, said Mark. He's my coach, too. He loves football, doesn't he? Smiled Heath. Just then, some teachers came into the hall. The school principal, Mr. Brave, was with them. He walked up to the stage and said, Ah, there you are, Heath. We didn't know where you were. I just wanted to come and look at the hall. I love this place. I did some plays here. Heath told Mr. Brave. Ah, yes, said Mr. Brave. That was before my time here. Mark saw Mr. Rankin at the back of the hall. Heath saw him too. Hello, Mr. Rankin, he called. Hello, Heath, said Mr. Rankin. He walked up to the stage. Mark can't see my play on Saturday because he has to play football, said Heath. Can't he come to my play? No, he can't, said Mr. Rankin. We need him. We're playing Riverdale. It's the biggest game of the year. You played in the team when you were a student here, Heath. You know Mark has to play on Saturday. Heath looked at Mark. Mr. Rankin's right. You should play football on Saturday, Mark. Come and see my next play. Mr. Brave said, Boys, go to class. Mr. Mason will be talking to the school soon. Goodbye, Heath, said Mr. Lee. Thanks for asking about Saturday, said Mark. Nice to meet you. Goodbye, Mark. Goodbye, Mr. Lee, said Heath. Outside, Mr. Lee said, Wow, we met Heath Mason. But why is he here? Asked Mark. I don't know, said Mr. Lee. In the afternoon, all the classes had to go to the hall. Mark and Mr. Lee went with their English class. This time, the hall was full of students and teachers. Mr. Brave walked onto the stage. Today we have a visitor. He is an old boy of the school. He was a student here before any of you came here, but you all know him. Here he is, Mr. Heath Mason. All the students started talking. Then Heath walked onto the stage, and there was a lot of cheering and clapping. Some students stood up. Teachers yelled at the students to sit down and be quiet. Then Heath smiled and raised his hands, and all the students sat quietly. Thank you, Mr. Brave, said Heath. Good afternoon, boys. It's nice to be back at my old school. I'm here to talk about being an actor. It's not an easy job, but I love it. I started acting here on this stage when I was 15. And now I want you to act on this stage too. Mark looked at Mr. Lee. What was Heath going to say next? I've spoken to Mr. Brave about this. I want some of you to try acting, so there is going to be a play competition. There will be prizes for the best play and the best actor. I will come back here 5 weeks from now. I'll watch the plays that you put on. The group that puts on the best play in the competition will come to the first night of my next play at the City Theater in November. I'll be doing Shakespeare's As You Like It. You can come and meet the other actors in the play, and the best actor in the competition will be on my television show Here and Now for a day. One boy from this school will play my little brother. There was a lot of noise from the students. That will be me, said Mark quietly. That will be me, said Mr. Lee quietly. Both boys wanted that prize, but only one boy could win the competition. Mark and Mr. Lee were very excited about the competition. We need to find a good play to put on, said Mark on the way home from school. Yes, the library was full of boys after school, said Mr. Lee. They were all looking for books of plays. The library doesn't have many plays, said Mark. Mark, Mr. Lee, wait for us, called a boy with long black hair. It was their friend James Reed. James was with John Mitchell. All 4 boys were good friends. Mark and Mr. Lee waited for James and John. Then the 4 boys walked along the street. So what play are we going to do? Asked James. We, said Mark. But you don't like plays, James. Yes, I do, said James. Don't look so surprised. It'll be fun. James wants to win the competition. He wants to go on television, said John. I don't, but I do want to be in a play. But John, you and James have never done any acting, said Mr. Lee. It's not easy. You can teach us, said John. What kind of play shall we do? We can do any kind of play. It can be funny or sad, said Mark. It must be no longer than 15 minutes. Let's do a funny play, said James. I like to make people laugh. Me too, said Mr. Lee. But maybe Heath Mason likes sad plays. He is doing Hamlet. We should do the play that is right for us, said John. You're right, John, said Mark. We have to find the right play. Let's all look for one and meet at my house after school on Friday. Everyone brings one play. I'll go to the bookshop, said Mr. Lee. Good, said Mark. And I'll visit my grandfather. He has a lot of books. Maybe he has some books of plays. The group met on Friday. You go first, James, said Mark. Did you find a play? Yes, I brought this book, said James. He showed it to the group. It has some very funny plays in it. I like this one the best, Monkey Man. It's about a man who can turn people into monkeys. I don't want to be a monkey in front of the school, said John. Ooh, ooh, ooh! James made loud monkey noises and started jumping about. Mr. Lee laughed and jumped about too. They made louder and louder monkey noises. Quiet, you two! Yelled Mark. He was looking at James's book. James, Monkey Man has 10 people in it. There are only 4 of us, and I don't want to be a monkey on stage, said John. So, what did you find, John? Asked James. John showed them a book of plays by William Shakespeare. I really like these, and Heath Mason likes Shakespeare too, said Mr. Lee. but his plays are much too long, and they have a lot more people than Monkey Man. Monkey Man! Oh, ooh! Yelled James. He jumped up again. Quiet, James! Yelled John. He opened the book. Look, this is Romeo and Juliet. We don't have to do all the play. We can just do these pages here. It's when Romeo is in a fight. I'll be Romeo, yelled James. I'll fight you, yelled Mr. Lee. The two boys ran around the living room. Stop it, yelled Mark. Then he said, I like Romeo and Juliet too, John, but maybe it's too hard for us, and I want to do something new. What did you find, Mr. Lee? I've got one called Taylor Taylor, said Mr. Lee. It's new. It's about a boy and a girl who have the same name. I don't want to be a girl in front of the school, said John. It's better than being a monkey, said Mr. Lee. Monkey Man! Yelled James, and he jumped up again. Quiet, said Mark. I went to see my grandfather. We looked at a lot of plays, but they were all too long, or they had too many people in them. So you don't have a play to show us? Said John. No, said Mark. Okay, we'll do Monkey Man then, said James. Ooh, 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 ooh. No, I'm not doing that play, said John. Let's do Romeo and Juliet. No, said Mr. Lee. No Shakespeare, and I don't want to be a girl in Mr. Lee's play, said James. Everyone in the group started yelling. My play, no, my play, Monkey Man, we can't do that. Quiet, yelled Mark. You don't even have a play, said James angrily. No, but listen, said Mark. We want to do a new play, right? So let's write a play. The group looked at Mark. Mr. Lee and I have written short plays at our acting school, he said. Mr. Lee smiled. My play was bad. I can dance and act, but I can't write. But you write well, Mark. Your play was very good. Let's do that one, said John. We can't. It has 12 people in it. I wrote it for our acting class, said Mark. But I can write a new one. I'll write a play for 4 people, just for us. We don't have much time, said John. The competition is only a month away. You can do it, Mark, said Mr. Lee. You'll write a really good play. What will it be about? Asked John. I don't know yet, said Mark. I want a play with tap dancing in it, said Mr. Lee. And drums, said James. I want to play drums. Let's meet here again on Sunday, said Mark. I'll tell you what the play will be about then. The next day was Saturday, the day of the big game against Riverdale. James and John came to watch the game. Mr. Lee went to see Heath Mason in Hamlet. How is the writing going, Mark? What's your idea for the play? Asked James before the game. Have you written it yet? Asked John. I haven't had time to do any writing, said Mark. Mark didn't know what to write about yet. He had no idea. He wanted to write a really good play and win the competition, but he didn't know what to do. It was hard. He hadn't slept much. He was very tired. Mr. Rankin came across the football field. Mark, he yelled, the Riverdale team is here already. Get out on the field and play hard. We must win this game. John and James watched the game. Come on, Mark, they yelled. You can do it. But Mark played very badly. He was too tired. Gary Howard ran up to him on the field. You're the worst player, Clark, he said. A girl can kick better than you. Mark said nothing. Gary was right. He was playing very badly. Here comes the ball, said Gary. He ran after the ball and kicked it hard. Yes! He yelled and jumped in the air. Gary was playing well. Mr. Rankin yelled from the side of the field, "Mark Clark, come off the field now!" Mr. Rankin told another boy to play. Mark walked slowly off the field. Mr. Rankin yelled at him, "What's wrong with you? Are you ill?" "No, sir," said Mark. Mark's team won the game, but Mr. Rankin wasn't happy. "We have 3 more games this year. We must win them all," he said to them. "Mark, you played very badly today. The team needs you to play well." "Gary, you were the best player today, but every boy in this team must play better. I want to win." When Mark was unhappy, he often visited his grandfather. "Hello, Granddad," said Mark. "Hello, Mark. What's wrong?" Mark told his grandfather about the football game and about what Mr. Rankin said. "We all have good days and bad days, Mark," said his grandfather. "You'll play better next time. Forget it. Let's talk about your play. How's it going?" "Not very well. I can't think of a story," said Mark. "When I want to find a good story, I read this," said his grandfather. "It's full of good ideas." Mark's grandfather gave Mark a big old book, Stories from Old Greece. "Mark, read. You'll find a good story in there," said Mark's grandfather. "Thanks, Granddad," said Mark. Mark took the book home and read it that night. In the morning, he had an idea for the new play. On Sunday, the group met at Mark's house. "Heath Mason was a really good Hamlet," said Mr. Lee, "and I loved the fight at the end of the play." Mr. Lee jumped up. He showed his friends some of the fight. "Okay, Mr. Lee," said Mark. "We have to get on with our play now. We only have a month." "What play are we doing?" Mark asked James. Mark smiled and said, "I'm writing a play called Firelight. It's about a man called Prometheus." "Pro who?" said James. "I know the story of Prometheus," said John. "He gave fire to men, didn't he?" "Yes," said Mark. "I read the story in a book last night. Prometheus made men out of clay," said James. "My mom makes flower pots out of clay. She makes coffee cups out of clay too. But making men out of clay, it's an old story." "James," said Mark, "a Greek myth." "Okay, so in this myth, Prometheus made men out of clay. Is that what the play is about?" "Wait and listen, James," said Mark. "Prometheus made men out of clay, and he taught them a lot of things. He taught them to grow food, and he taught them to fight." "To fight? Can we have fighting in the play?" asked James. "Maybe," said Mark. "But that's not the end of the story. The men didn't have fire. Zeus, the king of the gods, didn't like men. Zeus didn't want them to have fire. But Prometheus wanted to give fire to his men, so he went to the place where the gods did their cooking. He took some fire. He stole fire from the gods. But Zeus wanted a world without fire, so Zeus was very angry with Prometheus." "Do they fight?" asked James. "Be quiet, James," said John. "I really like this myth, Mark. It will make a good play." "We have a lot of work to do," said Mark. "Are you guys all happy to do this story?" "Yes," they all said. "Then let's get to work. And can you all come here after school on Tuesday? We'll need to work hard on this play," Mark said. "We'll need to rehearse a lot." "We'll need to do what?" asked James. "Rehearse. We'll need to do the play again and again to get it right." "We mustn't tell any other boys about this," said John. We don't want another group to steal our idea." "John is right," said Mr. Lee. "We mustn't talk about this to the other groups." "On with the show," said James. "I want to be Prometheus." "No, I want to be Prometheus," said Mr. Lee. "It's my idea," said Mark. "So I'm going to be Prometheus." "Quiet!" yelled John. "Don't fight, or we won't have a show." "I'm going home," said Mr. Lee. "Me too," said James. They left. "Oh, well, I'll go too," said John. "I like your idea, Mark, and I don't want to be Prometheus. I just want to be in the play." "Thanks, John," said Mark. Mark needed Mr. Lee and James to do his play. Without them, there was no group and no play. That night, he phoned Mr. Lee. "Hi, Mr. Lee," Mark said. "Listen, you can be Prometheus. You're the best actor in our group, and you can dance. I'm the writer, and I want Prometheus to dance in our show. James can be Zeus. He'll be the king of the gods, and Zeus can play drums. James will like that idea. John and I can be the other people in the play." "Really? Thanks, Mark," said Mr. Lee. "But then you won't win the Best Actor prize. You won't do much acting." "But I'll write the play. Maybe it will win the prize for the best play." "It will. I know it will," said Mr. Lee. Mark phoned James next. James liked the idea of being Zeus. He loved the idea of playing the drums. Then Mark phoned John. "Hi, John," he said. "It's going to be okay. James and Mr. Lee are happy now. I am too. The show can go on." The group worked hard for the next 2 weeks. Mark wrote the play very quickly. The boys all learned their words. They had a lot of fun. Mark tried hard at football, too. One day, Mr. Rankin said, "Well done, Mark. You're playing very well." Gary came close to Mark and said, "I'm better than you. You're hopeless." Then he hit Mark on the arm. "I saw that, Gary Howard," yelled Mr. Rankin. "Don't hit other players, do you understand?" "Yes, sir," said Gary. Then he said quietly to Mark, "Why do you play football, Clark? You're always doing your acting. Footballers should just play football." "I can do both." "Oh, yeah? Your group's play is hopeless," said Gary. "It's not hopeless," said Mark. "We're going to win." "All plays are hopeless," said Gary, and he walked away. Mark watched him go. The group rehearsed often, some days in a classroom after school, some days at Mark's house. Mr. Lee worked hard on the tap dance for Prometheus. James loved playing the drums. When he walked onto the stage, Mark and John were the men of clay. John and his mother made the costumes for the play. James liked his costume. Zeus wore a big purple coat. John made masks for the group. The masks went over the top half of their faces. The boys could wear their masks and say their words. The mask for Zeus was golden. The mask for Prometheus was white. The masks for the men of clay were brown. "I like my golden mask," said James. "The sun is golden, so is Zeus. I'm the king of the gods." Then one Wednesday, John didn't come to school that afternoon. The phone rang at Mark's house. Mark answered it. "It's Mrs. Mitchell here, Mark. John's mother." "Hello, Mrs. Mitchell. How are you?" "I'm fine, but John is sick. He's got glandular fever." "Oh, no," said Mark. "Yes, he was very tired last night, and this morning he was really sick. We went to the doctor, and he said it was glandular fever. Will he be okay?" Yes, but he has to stay home from school for a few weeks. He wanted me to phone you because he won't be able to be in your play. It's sad. He really wanted to be in it. That's really bad news. I hope he gets better soon, said Mark. Oh, Mrs. Mitchell, the costumes and masks. John has them. Oh, yes, that's right. I'll get them to you over the weekend. Is that all right? Yes, that will be fine, said Mark. Thanks, Mrs. Mitchell, and I'm sorry about John. Mark told James and Mr. Lee the bad news the next day. Maybe we can find another boy to be in our play, said James. But who? Said Mr. Lee. Everyone's in a play already. Maybe we'll have to make a boy out of clay, said James. Ha, not funny, said Mr. Lee. There's no time to write the play again, said Mark. I know, said Mr. Lee. The competition is at the end of next week, and my last football game is only 2 days away, said Mark. I need to get some sleep tonight. At football training that afternoon, Mark tried to forget about the play. He tried to forget about John. He tried to kick the ball well. Gary Howard kept running in front of Mark. Mark fell over. Get up, Mark, yelled Mr. Rankin. It's not time for bed yet. The team laughed. Gary laughed the loudest. Maybe he's tired, sir, said Gary. Maybe he's too tired to be in the game on Saturday. He's been doing his play all the time. I don't want to hear any more about those plays. We're here to play football, said Mr. Rankin. Now, boys, one of you will have to watch the game on Saturday. We have too many players, so one of you won't play. Think about that. Okay, said the boys. Back to work. I want to see 15 more minutes of hard football before we finish today. The boys played again. Gary stood near Mark, and the ball came towards them. Mark kicked it, but then Gary hit Mark. Right, that's it, yelled Mr. Rankin. I've told you before, Gary Howard, no hitting. You're out of the team for Saturday. What? Said Gary. But I'm the best player, sir. Not another word, boy, said Mr. Rankin. You're not going to play. Oh, sir, said some of the other boys. Mark said, Can I play half the game, sir? Then Gary can play the other half. No, Mark. Gary can sit and watch, said Mr. Rankin, and he walked away. Gary was very angry. I don't need your help, Clark, he said to Mark in a nasty voice. John phoned Mark on Friday evening. How are you? Asked Mark. Not good, said John. Glandular fever is no fun. I'm really tired all the time. Listen, I'm sorry about the play. That's okay, John. And good luck in the football game, Marco Rowe. My mom will bring the costumes and masks to you then. Okay, said Mark. You just get better. I'll try. Maybe I'll be a little better by the end of next week. Then I'll be able to come and see the play. I'd like to see my costumes and masks on the stage, and I'd like to see you guys win the competition. The day of the last football game was cold and wet. James and Mr. Lee came to watch the game. Most of the school came to watch. Gary Howard was there. He was not happy. He didn't want to sit on the side. The first half of the game was hard. The other team was very good. Mark had to play his very best football. He was tired and cold and wet. It was hard to play in the rain. Please, can I play now, Mr. Rankin? Asked Gary after the first half. No, said Mr. Rankin. The team's playing well without you. Gary looked very sad. Okay, boy. I want a good, hard, fast second half. Go out there and win, said Mr. Rankin. They did win. There was a lot of cheering, but not from Gary. He went up to Mark. I should have played today, Clark, not you. James and Mr. Lee ran up to Mark and yelled, You won! You won! You were great! Thanks, guys, said Mark. Well done, Mark, said Mrs. Mitchell. She was carrying a big bag. Here are the costumes and masks, she said. Good luck with the play, boys. Thanks, Mrs. Mitchell, said Mark. Say hello to John for us. James and Mr. Lee left, and Mark carried the bag to the changing room at the side of the field. The boys and Mark's team were all in the changing room. Mark put the bag down and got changed. He took off his wet football clothes, and he put on some warm, dry clothes. We won! We won! Yelled the boys in the team. There was a lot of noise, yelling and singing and laughter. Mr. Rankin had a big smile on his face. Half an hour later, most of the boys were leaving the changing room. It was time for Mark to go home too. He looked for the big bag. He looked under all the seats in the changing room. The bag was gone. Where could it be? Suddenly Mark knew. He went to an old house at the far end of town. There were some old, broken chairs outside the front door. A fat man with no hair was sitting there. His clothes were dirty. Hello, Mr. Howard. What do you want? The man said in a nasty voice. Is Gary home? Asked Mark. Who are you? I'm Mark Clark. I go to school with Gary. His room's at the back, said Mr. Howard. Go in. Mark went inside. The house was dark. He walked to the back of the house and looked in a bedroom. Gary was there, and the bag of costumes was at his feet. He was wearing the golden mask and the purple coat and looking at himself in a mirror. He didn't see Mark. Mark didn't say a word. Then Gary saw him. He quickly took off the mask and coat and threw them across the room. What are you doing here? He shouted. Get out! His face was red. You took our costumes and masks, said Mark. Why? Gary didn't reply. Why did you take them, Gary? Then Gary spoke in a quiet voice. You want to do everything, don't you? You play football, and you do your plays, and you just take your stupid things and get out. He turned away from Mark. Mark was angry, but then he heard Gary make a noise. Was he crying? Gary, said Mark. He had an idea. Gary, wait. Would you like to be in our play? What? Said Gary. He turned and looked at Mark. His eyes were wet. Would you like to be in our play? Mark said again. Me in your play? Don't be stupid. But we need you. John can't do it. He's sick. We need another actor. Please, Gary. No, said Gary. I don't want to. Please, Gary, Mark said again. It'll be fun. There's fire in it and drums. Gary didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, Okay. What? Yelled Mr. Lee. You asked Gary Howard? Said James. Why? Asked Mr. Lee. Mark looked at James and Mr. Lee. Gary isn't in another play, and he really wants to be in our play. We have 1 week to go, and we need him. Come on, guys, let's try doing the play with Gary. James looked at Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee looked at James. Okay, said Mr. Lee. Here he comes now, said Mark. The new group rehearsed very hard. Gary really liked being a man made of clay, but he often forgot his words. 3 days before the competition, Gary forgot his words again. I'm hopeless, aren't I? Said Gary to Mark. No, you're not, said Mark. You've worked very hard. I'm really happy you're in our play, Gary. We couldn't do it without you. The day before the competition, the boys went to the school hall. All the groups had to rehearse their plays in front of the teachers and the principal. Mark and his group were third. The first group did some pages from Macbeth. It's good that we're not doing a play by Shakespeare, said Mr. Lee quietly. The second group did a funny play. Oh, that was very good, said James. Maybe they'll win. Then Mark's group went on stage. Firelight went well. At the end, Mr. Lee came on stage. He was tap dancing and carrying a stick. The stick was on fire. He danced over to Mark and Gary. They held a big golden bowl. Mr. Lee put the stick into the golden bowl. Then the bowl was full of fire. I, Prometheus, give you fire, said Mr. Lee. Stop, Mr. Brave called out. Stop the play. Mr. Lee stopped dancing. What's wrong, sir? Asked Mark. Put that fire out now, said Mr. Brave. Mark and Gary put out the fire. You cannot have fire on stage, said Mr. Brave. But we must have fire for our play, sir, said Mark. It's all about fire. Not in this hall. Get off the stage now, said Mr. Brave. Next group, please. What could they do? Was this the end of their play? I have an idea, said Mark to the group. He went over to Mr. Brave. They had a long talk. James, Mr. Lee, and Gary stood and watched them. Then Mark came back to the group. It's okay. The show must go on, and it will. Listen. It was the night of the competition. Heath Mason was in the hall. A lot of boys and their families were there. John was there with his mother and father. It was a big night. There were 10 plays. Mark's group was the last group of the night. The other groups did their plays. Some of the plays were very good. Then it was time for Mark's group. Mark went up on stage. He spoke to the people in the hall. For the last play, please follow us outside to the football field. There was a lot of noise. Go outside? Why? People slowly went out of the hall and onto the football field. It was a very cold night, but there were no clouds. The stars and the moon shone in the night sky. Now please stand in a big circle around here, said Mark. He pointed to a large pile of sticks on the ground. The people all moved and stood in a circle around the sticks. Then James played his drums, and the actors walked into the circle. On with the show. At the end of the play, Mr. Lee lit the golden bowl of fire. Then Gary and Mark carried the golden bowl to the pile of sticks. They put the golden bowl onto the pile, and the fire from the bowl lit the sticks. The fire danced high into the night sky. Prometheus gave fire to men. Nobody spoke. Mark and his group stood quietly. They took off their masks. Then the crowd started cheering and clapping. The boys smiled. They liked it, said Mr. Lee. Heath Mason stepped close to the big fire and held up his hands. Thank you to all the groups. I really liked the plays tonight. A lot of work has gone into all of them. Now it's time to say who has won the prize for the best play. Goes to Firelight. There was a lot of clapping and cheering. Mark said to John, "Come with us. You made the masks and costumes. You were one of the group." The 5 boys went and shook hands with Heath. Heath held up his hands again. And the prize for the best actor goes to Prometheus in Firelight, Mr. Lee MacDonald. Mr. Lee looked at Mark. "Thanks, Mark," he said quietly. Then Mr. Lee walked over to Heath and shook hands with him again. "You are a very good actor, Mr. Lee," said Heath. "You'll play my little brother very music well." Heath looked around the circle of people and said, "One more thing. I want to ask the boy who wrote Firelight to meet the writers of Here and Now. We need good new writers for television." A short time later, the group stood by the fire. A lot of people had left. It was late. "Wow, that was the best fun," said James. "Thanks to Mark," said Mr. Lee. "You wrote the best play." Mark smiled and smiled. He said to Gary, "You weren't hopeless, Gary." Gary laughed. "No, I wasn't. I love being an actor." Heath Mason walked over to them. "I love being an actor, too," he said. "I remember doing plays here at school, but we never did a play out here. That was a very good idea. I have to go now, but I'll see you all in November." Mr. Lee and Mark. "The people from Here and Now will speak to you two next week." "Thanks, Heath," said Mark. "Thanks for bringing plays back to our school." "Ha, just like Prometheus bringing fire to man," said John. They all laughed.